Welcome to Live DAF, your online DAF Yomi Shir.
Shalom Aleichem, welcome back. Today's Daf Yomi is GITTEN Daf Nun Gimel. We are holding at the Mishnah on Nun Beis Amud Beis, 5 from the bottom. Says the Mishnah, Hamatame. One approaches his friend's produce and makes a tummy, or he mixes truma into his friend's non-truma material, into his friend's chulin, rendering it a mixture which is asur for a Yisrael. So he basically damaged his friend's produce. Or he made his friend's wine into yain nesach. All these are examples of hezek she'eino yikar, invisible damage. It was damaged, but in the spiritual realm rather than the tangible physical realm. So in all these cases we say b'shogeik pater. If it was done by accident, he's exempt. But made it chayiv, if he did it on purpose, he has to pay. The Gemara, of course, will discuss the reason for this halacha. But first, itmar we have learned. When we say menasech in the Mishnah, what exactly happened? How did he make his friend's wine into yain nesach? Rav amar menasech mamish. Rashi says, shichshech biyadai l'soichei l'shem avodah zarah. He picked up his wine and he wiggled his hand through it with the intent of worshipping avodah zarah in that manner. V'kach hoisa avodas, and that's how they did it, resulting in yain nesach, which is asur bahana, which one cannot benefit from. He made it asur. So Rav says literally he was menasech. He poured it. He made it into yain nesach. Shmuel amar ma'ariv. No, he didn't actually make it yain nesach. He took pre-existing yain nesach and he mixed it into his friend's wine, rendering that mixture asur. So according to Rav, he was menasech. According to Shmuel, he merely mixed yain nesach into the other friend's wine. Now, why did each shita not agree with the other? Man amar ma'ariv. Shmuel, who says there was a mix, my timer lo amar menasech. Why didn't he learn like Rav? Well, the Mishnah says menasech. So why didn't he learn simply that he did nisuch? Amalach, Shmuel responds, well, menasech, to actually do nisuch, it's a bit tricky. Why? Because how then does the Mishnah obligate him to pay? Kamlei b'derabah mineh. There's a halacha that when a person commits a double crime, something which entails a chiyuv misa, capital punishment, such as skila, which is applied to a person doing avodah zarah, as well as a monetary obligation that comes along with it, such as in this case where he damaged his friend's property, the most severe punishment is applied, i.e. misa. There's no chiyuv moment. So how could the Mishnah say b'mezid he has to pay? That's why Shmuel could not learn like Rav that he actually did avodah zarah. V'idach. So how does Rav answer that question? Why is he obligated to pay? The answer is Kid Rabbi Yirmiyah. Damar Rabbi Yirmiyah mishas hagbaha hudekana. As soon as he picked up, as soon as he lifted the wine, he acquired it, meaning he stole it before he did the actual nisuch. Meschayba nafsha le'yahavi achas nisuch. The chiyuv skila, the chiyuv misa, only arrives later when he actually does the nisuch, a second later, a minute later. So it was a two-stage process, even though it led to nisuch, but we could split into two. The monetary obligation kicks in as soon as he lifts the wine and acquires it and steals it. And that's why he's chayiv. Because he stole his wine and he has nothing to give back. It's asur bahana. The nisuch happened later. It's unrelated to the first part of that ma'aseh. So we could very well understand why he has to pay. And apparently Shmuel holds, so this is Taisus explaining, Shmuel holds it's all one swoop, it's one thing. He lifted it in order to do nisuch. You can't split the two. And if nisuch generates chiyuv misa, there's no way we can generate chiyuv mamain to this fellow. Asks the Gemara the other way around. Rav learns actual nisuch happened. My time, why didn't he learn like Shmuel that he made a mix? Because that's exactly like the second case in the Mishnah, where he mixed truma into chulin. So why replicate the the concept. So apparently Menasech means Menasech Mamish. V'idach, what does Shmuel do with that question? Once we speak about Medameya, which is a form of mixing Isser Beheter, why repeat the same similar case with Menasech, mixed Isser Beheter? V'idach Knaso, because after all, the Mishnah here, which obligates him to pay, it's a knas, it's a penalty, because as we're going to learn later, this type of damage, this type of harm is called hezek she'ein nikar. It's not visible, it's not tangible. Min haTorah lo yishmei hezek. We don't consider it a hezek. He's not really responsible. Rather, the Chachamim applied a knas, they penalized him for doing this to his friend's property. Well, sometimes there are factors which dictate that this is deserving of knas, this is more common, this is more, the other one does not have knas, so we can't compare apples to oranges, and therefore there's a need to actually stipulate various cases with the knas that comes along with it. That's Shmuel's approach. We can't learn one case from the other because it's knas. So it makes perfect sense that the Mishnah would actually list various cases, even though they're very similar to each other, such as Medameya and Menasich. Now, according to Rav, who didn't seem to have this problem, right? The reason why he didn't learn Menasich, like Shmuel, that it was a mix, because that mix concept can be learned from Medameya. You can learn one knas from the other. You can compare knases. If that's the case, then we have a question. Why does the Mishnah in fact mention 3 cases? Kol hani lamali. If we can learn one knas from the other, just like the Chachamim applied a knas to this type of indivisible damage, the same to the others. Why mention 3 separate cases? Tzricha all have a chiddush. All are needed. Why? Let's go down the list. Di tana metame. If we only mention metame, well, for a good reason. I truma. If he was metame his friend's truma, I would say mishum de kamafsela lagamri, because he's totally ruining it. He's making it totally inedible. That's why he has to pay. Even metame chulin, if it's speaking that he was metame his friend's chulin, which can still be eaten after it's tummy, the reason why we apply a knas is because he did something terrible. Mishum de asro ligraim tuma lechulin. Eretz Yisrael, why may not cause tuma to something which is chulin in Eretz Yisrael, because people might want to eat it b'tahara. So he did something wrong. So we fully understand this is really a compounded violation, and therefore he has to pay up. But if he's just mixing truma to his friend's chulin, it's still edible. Give it to the kayin. Not so bad. Perhaps it doesn't deserve a knas. And that's why we have to mention medameya as well. If we mention medameya, I would say mishum de shchiach, because unfortunately it's a very common thing. Things should get mixed up, and he can just blame it on the circumstance. Therefore, we apply a knas. But to make something tamei, it's not something common. Perhaps a knas is not in place. That's why we mention that as well. If we mention these 2, I would say knas is certainly applicable because there's no chi of mis, and there's no issue of kimla b'derabba minei. But when he actually did nisach yayin, the kimle b'derabba minei, there's a kimle b'derabba minei factor, as we mentioned before. Perhaps there's no payment in place. That's why we have to mention this as well. And the chiddush is like Rav Yirmiyah, like we said before. We split the process into 2. There is the monetary part, and then there is a chi of misa part. So that's why the Mishnah mentioned all 3 cases. Each one has a special chiddush. Asks the Gemara, now what about the brisa that Rav Avin's father presented? A little bit of a different version than our Mishnah in terms of these halachas. It goes like this. In the good old days, they would say only 2 cases deserve knas, hametame v'menasich. And then they added the 3rd. Now, once they had metame and menasach, which really contain all the chedushim. Look, metame is a very severe thing; it makes it inedible, etc. Menasach has the kimla b'derabim aspect, and still we apply knas. So why did we have to go add medamei afterwards, which is a lesser chiddush, a lesser case? Kol hani lamali. So why do we need all 3 cases? Tzricha, they're all needed. Why? The yashminu metame. If we only mention metame, mishum delay kimla b'derabim, there's no chi of misa, there's no issue of kimla b'derabim, so knas kicks in. Avo menasech tekim l'Rabbi by menasech, where there's a death penalty involved, perhaps that complicates things, and there's no there's no knas applied. That's why we mentioned that as well. V'yashmina menasech. Conversely, we only mention menasech mishum dekamas legamri, because when he does nisuch, well, he totally destroys the wine. It's asur totally bahana. Of course, a knas kicks in. Avo metami, when he's metami, his friend's fruit. It's not total destruction, although it's totally inedible, perhaps. But if it's truma, but even by truma tmeya, you can still benefit from it. You can feed it as animal, you can use it as fuel. So perhaps we don't apply a knas. That's why we mention metami as well. Had we only mentioned metami and menasech, I would say because he caused a real serious, large-scale loss. But when he mixed truma into his friend's chulin, it's relatively minor in terms of his actual losses, because he can just sell it to a kayin. Perhaps we don't apply a knas tzricha. That's why we have to mention all three cases, whether it's metame, whether it's medameya, whether it's menasech, each one with his own unique properties. A knas is applied if he did it b'mezid. Okay. Amar Chizkiah. Here comes an interesting machlekes. Chizkiah says, Dvar Torah, you should know that minhat Torah, echad shogeg, ve'echad mezid, chayev. When it involves a hezek she'ein nikar, right, an invisible damage, like metame, etc., whether he did it on purpose or by accident, he is responsible. You know why? My taima? Because Chizkiah holds hezek she'ein nikar, even though it's not a visible, tangible damage, shmei hezek. Minhat Torah, it constitutes damage and harm. And he's liable minhat Torah, and of course when it comes to a mazik minhat Torah, there's no differentiation between on purpose and by accident. Rashi says we have a pasuk, petza tachas petza, even a shegi is chayiv if it's a true mazik. And according to Chizkiah, even a hezek she'eino nikar is a true mazik. So the question is, why does the Mishnah say shegi is potter? Uma tam amru b'shegi potter. The answer is kadeshi idea. Chacham instituted that exemption. You know why? So that the mazik should be inclined, should be motivated to go inform the victim. So we give him that break. You know what? You get immunity. Go tell him what happened so that he knows that his stuff is usur. Really, he should have to pay, but we give him that pass. So then even if he did it on purpose, we should give him the same pass. No, look, the whole reason why he did it is to spite him, to harm him. You think he's not going to tell him about it? Of course I'll tell him about it. So that factor is not at play, and therefore we can very well obligate him to pay for the damage. That's Chizkiah's approach. Hezek she'ein nikar is considered a mazik. Rabbi Yehuda, he disagrees, and that's how he paskin. Dvar Torah echad shogeg v'kach potter. No, whether it's by accident or on purpose, if it's hezek she'ein nikar, he's really potter. My time of why hezek she'ein nikar, lo yishmei hezek. Ma tam amr mezid chayev. And the question is the other way around. So why does he have to pay if he did it on purpose? It's a knas d'rabbanan, as we mentioned before. Shelo yehei kol echad ve'echad hoylech metame taroisav shel chaveroi. V'im potarni, to protect the victim, so that people should not be tempted to go and be metame and ruin the other person's stuff and say, "Well, I didn't mean it. It's just hezek she'ein nikar." So we say, look, you did it, but mezid you have to pay. So it's a knas d'rabbanan. Okay, now let's bring a raya to Rabbi Yehuda. Tanan of a Mishnah, Kehanim shepiglu b'mikdash. A kohen is involved in the carbon and he makes it pigul. He has in mind, he says, I'm doing this in order to, I plan on bringing it onto the mizbeach, and 2 days from now, it makes it pasul. So does he have to compensate the owner for the carbon? Well, mezidim chayav. If it was on purpose, he has to pay. But Tani Allah, we have a brayso which explains, you know why? To protect the community. End of story. According to Chizkiah, it's a kasha on Chizkiah. If you hold that it's a proper hezek, even though it's ein a nikar, hay shogegen pturin metikar oil b'bayilei. So instead of the brayso providing the reason of tikkun oilam to explain why, if he did it on purpose he has to pay. Well, if he did it on purpose, of course he has to pay. It's hezek. The reason of Tikkun Olam is to explain why the Chacham gave him a discount when it was by accident, so that he informs the victim, etc. So why did the Mishnah say it the other way? It's exactly what the Bryce is saying. It's sort of missing some words. If the Kohen did pigel, mezidin, he has to pay chayavin. And let's make a diuk. Ha-shaygi can put turin, but if it was by accident, he's potter. On that we say, you know why? So that he informs the victim. But of course, chizki is right. Even Ezek Shein and Nikr like pigel is called a mazik menater. Most of Rabbi Lazar have another kasha on chizki. The Brisa says, if a person works, does a job, does something with the water prepared for the ashes of the paraduma, or with the actual para of the paraduma, pater medini adam, even though he makes it puzzle, because we need full focus and concentration without diversion, without doing malachis, he's still exempt in a court of law. He doesn't have to compensate the owner for the lost paraduma, but in heaven, he's going to have to pay for that. Okay? Now, what are we speaking about? A hezek shein and nikar. He did malach with the para, invalidates the para, but it's not physically visible. No physical change or physical damage here. V'yamar is hezek shein and nikar shmei hezek, according to Chizkiah. It constitutes proper damage, which obligates him even in dinei adam. Then b'dinei adam namel chayiv, let him pay up even in court for this type of behavior. So it's a kasha on Chizkiah. Who moisiv lo, who mefarek lo. Rabbi Lezer, who asked the kasha, provided an answer as well. We're speaking about a unique type of psul. He didn't do a malacha outright, a direct malacha. It was causation. It was a garama. It was incidental. Para is speaking sheichnisa l'ravka. He took the para into the place where they, like the pen where they go and they thresh there. He put her in there, al manasha tinak, so the calf can nurse from her mother. That would have been fine. That's legal. V'tidosh. Problem is, he also had in mind that it should help with the threshing. So technically what he did in terms of the act, the masa, he did nothing wrong. The thought is what counts. The thought, the machshava, is what destroyed everything. He had a mind that that the para should help out in the malacha. Says Rashi, that's called a machshava, and that's just a grama. That's a causation. It's a grama, and therefore, grama by damages is pater. The same idea with the meichatas. Sheshakal behen mishkolis. He didn't actually, rinse himself with the meicha. He didn't do a direct malacha. He had it sitting on one side of the scale, and he weighed something in the other against the chatas water. So therefore, he didn't do a direct mas in the meichatas. It doesn't qualify for chiyuv hezek, even though it invalidates the meichatas. But it wasn't a direct maisa, which qualifies for restitution. Says the Gemara, what do you mean? If he just used it that way, it wouldn't disqualify the meichatas. But Rabbi told us meichatas sheshakal behen mishkolis kshera. This type of use, having something weighed against the meichatas, doesn't constitute malacha. It wouldn't be an issue altogether. Like Kasha, the answer is depends how direct. Ha begufan, ha bekonektan. Rava's case is speaking that it was opposite. So the mechatas was on one side of the scale, and he used the other side of the scale to weigh against it. Of course, it's not a malacha that disqualifies, but the Bryce, which indicates that he has to pay, he's liable for damaging the mechatas. And speaking that he actually used the water itself to weigh something in it. So, for instance, there was a container with mechatas, and he dunked some meat inside, and based on how much that water rose, he determined the weight of that piece of meat. So it was an actual direct use of the water, and of course, that's called a malach, which disqualifies the water. 1 second, says the Gemara, now we're really stuck, because then he would be chayiv outright. The whole point was that it was just incidental, it was caused, but here was direct use of the water. Says the Gemara, begufan masa ka'avid, and it's a direct masa in the water, masa ka'avid behu. And if that's the case, going to Chizkiah, this direct masa, which disqualified it, even though it's hezek shein nikar, obligates payment. If he hezek shein nikar shmei hezek, according to Chizkiah, it's considered a mazik, then why is he exempt in a bezdin? B'dini avad adam nami l'chayev. So we'll start off ping-ponging. According to Chizkiah, why is this fellow not chayev? Oh, he just waited. Wait what? Opposite it? Okay, that wouldn't be puzzle anyways. Wait in it. Oh, then it's direct ma'isa, then it's a masa hezek. Of course he has to pay, even in a bezdin. So back to square one. Ella, rather, this is the correct pshat. Either connected. Rava's halacha that weighing the mechatas is not a paisel, and the Braisa also speaking, same case, that he weighed opposite the mechatas, on the other side of the scale. So there was no masa done directly with the mechatas. Like Kashan answers like this. Hoda asach date. And the Braisa was speaking that he harmed the mechatas because he diverted his mind. He lost focus. He was focusing on weighing the other, and he wasn't paying attention to the mechatas, which require a constant vigilance, a constant shmira. That makes it possible. But since it was just a mind thing, it was a hesach hadas. That's a gerama. It's causation. It's incidental. There's no chi of mazik for that. Even if you hold that unseen hezek, invisible damage, hezek shein nikar is called mazik. That's when he did a masa to do it, a masa to be paisel. He was a matame. But here it's just a mind thing. He could have very easily have retained his focus, but he didn't. That made it possible. That's grama ben azakani's potter. Hodelis asachadaiti. When Rabbi says there's no issue at all, weighing against the mechatas, we're speaking that he was totally focused and watching the mechatas at the time. Of course, in that case, it maintains its kashrus. Masir Rapapa. Here comes another kasha on Chizkiah, who says hezek shein nikar. Sorry, it's kasha Rabbi Yehuda, who says hezek shein nikar loish me hezek. Here comes the kasha. Masir Rapapa. We have a mishnah bavakam. Gozel matbeya. One steals a coin v'nifsal, and it goes out of circulation. It's worthless. Or he steals truma, and then v'nitmis becomes tummy, again worthless. Or he steals chametz. V'avar Pesach, and Pesach passes through, basically making it aser. So the thief can return the same item and say, look, I'm sorry. This is your item. It's worthless, too bad. This is yours. Question. V'i amris. Hezek shein nikar shmei hezek. Now, if you were to say that invisible damage is reckoned with, how can he pay back worthless coins? He stole something of value. Now it's worthless. True, there's no discernible change in the actual, property of the coin. But Hai Gazlanu, he stole a coin which had a certain amount of value, and now it's worthless. It's a damaged coin. He has to pay up. He has to pay properly. Tifta. So this is a refutation on Chizkiah. This proves Rabbi Yechanan's point. Although it's valueless, it's worthless, but it's hezek shein nikar. And min HaTorah, we don't reckon with that. Lema ketanai, perhaps this question of how to deal with hezek shein nikar is machlekes tanai. Okay, so the Braisa says like this: Hametame, v'amedame, v'amenasech. All the cases of an our Mishnah, hezek shein nikar. Echad shoigig v'echad mezid chayev. Whether he did it by accident or on purpose, he has to pay divrei meir. Rabbi Yehuda says no. Just like in our Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda b'shoigig poter b'mezid chayev was done on purpose, he has to pay, but b'shoigig is poter. How do we understand this machlekes? Mahila b'ka mitzvah. Perhaps the machlekes revolves around this question. The Mar Savar Rabbi Meir holds hezek shein nikar shmei hezek. It's a true mazik. Min HaTorah, you have to pay. And therefore, whether it's shoigig or mezid, pay up. Umar Sava. Rabbi Yehuda holds loish me hezek. Min HaTorah, it's not a mazik. It's only a knas d'Rabbanan, which is limited to mezid. Says the Gemara, no. Omar Nachmar Yitzchak, the Kuli Yama, perhaps everybody goes with the shita of hezek shein nikar, loish me hezek. And Min HaTorah, you potter. It's only a knas d'Rabbanan. The question is, to what extent do we apply the penalty? The question is whether we should stretch the knas to shegig as well, lest it come to mezid. Lest the person use it as an excuse. Well, I didn't mean it was a shegig, really it was a mezid. So we extend it to shegig as well. The question is, do we do that? That's the machlokes. How far to apply the knas? The Mar Savar, Rameir holds, we don't differentiate. Konsur shegig or to mezid, the knas applies to shegig as well as mezid. Umar Savar like konsur shegig or to mezid. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. We limit it to mezid and not a shegig. So bottom line is, everybody will hold hezek shein nikar lo yishmei hezek. The only reason why you would have to pay is midrabanan as a knas. The question is, do we limit the knas to mezid? That's Rabbi Yehuda. Rameir says we apply it to shegig as well. Now comes an interesting stira, a contradiction. V'rami d'Rameir d'Rameir. We're going to have a stira between Rameir over here, who applies the knas in all cases, to a different Rameir, who limits the knas to mezid, and likewise, v'rami d'Rabbi Yehuda. At Rabbi Yehuda we have a stira Rabbi Yehuda, because over here by the hezek shein nikar, he limits the knas to mezid, and elsewhere by cooking on Shabbos, he applies the knas even to shegig the sanya. Hamavashal b'Shabbos, if a person cooks on Shabbos a malacha, what happens to the food? If it was just b'shegig, he can have it. We don't penalize him. B'mezid, if he willingly did the malacha on Shabbos, he cannot eat it as a knas to Rabbanan de Rameir. Clearly, Rameir limits the knas to mezid. And by Yas, in our sugya, he applies it to shegig as well. That's one kash. Next kash. What about Rabbi Yehuda's shita? In our sugya, Rabbi Yehuda limits the knas to mezid, and here comes Rabbi Yehuda, who applies it to shegig as well. Rabbi Yehuda Omer b'shoigeg. If he cooked the food inadvertently, yoichel l'motzei Shabbos. He can't eat it on Shabbos. He has to wait until motzei Shabbos. So he shouldn't benefit from the malacha. There's a knas even on shegig. If he did it purposely, he shouldn't eat it forever. So here we go. Rabbi Yehuda applies the knas even to shegig. Let's just finish the brayso before we deal with these stira. We have a third sheet, Rabbi Yehuda Kessler. He holds that minat Torah, anything cooked on Shabbos is totally asur. So if it was done b'shogeg, okay, there's no isur there. Ya'achal l'motzei Shabbos la'acherim. Others can eat it motzei Shabbos, but he can't. But mezid, if it was done purposely, lo ya'achal l'lamis, nobody can eat it. Lo la'acherim, not him, not others. Okay, let's go back to our sugya. We have a double contradiction. One in Rameir, one in Rabbi Yehuda. Kasha do Rameir. We have a kasha between Rameir and our sugya, who says that knas is applied to shegig as well as mezid. Ad Rameir, on Rameir by the mavashal b'Shabbos, who limits the knas to mezid. Number one. Number two, kasha Rabbi Yehuda. We have a kasha from Rabbi Yehuda and our sugya, who limits the knas to mezid. Ad Rabbi Yehuda, on Rabbi Yehuda by bishul on Shabbos, who applies the knas to shegig as well. Here comes the answer. The Rameir like kasha. We're going to answer Rameir like this. Ki kanis. When does he apply the knas all across the board, even to shegig? B'de rabbanon. In a case where it's only the rabbanon, such as in our sugya, it's hezek shein nikar, it's only the rabbanon. You know, din and the rabbanon need special reinforcement. People sometimes can tend to neglect isurim the rabbanon, so we apply a chizuk, we reinforce it, we apply the knas even to shegig. But when it comes to cooking on Shabbos, which is an issa d'oraisa, which people tend to be more careful about, but d'oraisa, he didn't see a need to stretch the knas like kanes. He limited the knas to mezid. Asks the Gemara 1 second. But in our sugya, we had one case, at least according to Rav, which was the d'oraisa of hamanasech nisach hayayin. That's isra by the zara. D'oraisu because kanes and still Rameir applies a knas there by shegig as well. Well, mishum chumad avodas kechum, it's an exception because of the severity of avodas zara. We want to stay really clear and far. Kanes applied a knas in that as well. So bottom line, according to Rameir, when a knas is needed, we apply it by mezid for sure. What about by shegig? Only by the rabbanons, but not by the raisas typically. Regarding Rabbi Yehuda, we're going to answer it as well, but just flip everything around the other way. The Rabbi Yehuda, the Rabbi Yehuda kasha. Why? Ki lo kanas Rabbi b'derabbanon. In our sugya, we find that Rabbi Yehuda only applies the knas to mezid because it's din the rabbanon, it's hezek shein nikar. Not as severe as the raisa. It doesn't require an all-out knas, only by b'daraisa kanas. When it comes to cooking on Shabbos, daraisa, we look to reinforce that more, protect that more. We apply a knas even by shegig. Asks the Gemara, well, we have one question from Menasech. From Menasech in our sugya, which is daraisa, that's by the zarva loy kanas. Rabbi does not apply the knas by shegig there. Mishum Chumar Avodas Kechavim, because it's so despicable, because of its Avodah Zarah. Mivdo B'dilu B'nei, people tend to stay clear and far, and therefore there's no need to go the extra mile to apply the extra knas. So bottom line, we have two opposing views, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir, regarding how far to take the knas. According to Rabbi Meir, if he did these things b'mezid, a knas is in place. B'shoigig, well, if it's d'oraisa, we don't need to make a knas, because it's severe in people's eyes. But the Rabbanon, we have to reinforce. We apply the knas even by shoigig. Rabbi Yehuda goes the other way. Only by d'oraisa do we apply the extra knas of shoigig, but not the Rabbanon. Bottom line, according to Rabbi Meir, when it's the Rabbanon, we apply all across knas, but not by d'oraisa. Here we have another stira. V'rami de Rabbi Meir, ad Rabbi Meir b'd'oraisa. We're going to find the stira within d'oraisa, within Rabbi Meir. Because by us we learn that by d'oraisa, Rabbi Meir is not going to be so severe and strict. Whereas in the next price we find that when it comes to Shemitah violations, Rabbi Meir applies a knas even by shoigig, even though it's d'oraisa, the sanya. And eteh b'Shabbos. If one plants on Shabbos, he did a malacha. Well, it depends. B'shoigig, it was done inadvertently, you can maintain his sapling. B'mezid ya'akar. If he did it purposely, he's got to uproot it. Knas. Because he did it b'mezid. So that so far matches Rabbi Meir's shita. Ubishvias, here comes the question. But if you plant it on Shemitah year, bein b'shoigig, bein b'mezid ya'akar, Divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says whether he did it b'shoigig or mezid, we apply a knas to both. Why? It's d'oraisa. Why does he stretch the knas to shoigig as well? That's one kasha. Now we're going to have a kasha Rabbi Yehuda as well. Because Rabbi Yehuda holds that by d'oraisa we're extra careful. We apply the knas to all cases. And here comes Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda, b'shvius, if you plant it on Shemitah, no. B'shoigig you can. If you did it b'shoigig, you can keep it. But mezid yaakov. If it was done b'mezid, then he has to uproot it. Even though it's d'oraisa. So we have a double stira again. Shabbos, but if you plant it on Shabbos, bein b'shoigig, bein b'mezid ya'akar, whether it was b'shoigig or b'mezid, he has to uproot it, and that corresponds with Rabbi Yehuda's shita, that we apply the knas all across the board by d'oraisa. Bottom line is we have a big tumult going on. Big stira. Let's take it one step at a time. Rabbi Meir ad Rabbi Meir. In our sugi we concluded that Rabbi Meir limits his knas to mezid, except where it's the Rabbanah which needs extra enforcement. And here we say by Shemitah, he applies a knas even to shoigig. So as according to your reasoning, Tikshalach Higufan, and the whole Mishnah, the whole Brisa is problematic. Michti, why would there be a difference between Shemitah and Shabbos? How do you explain that? Ha-d'oraisa, Shabbos is d'oraisa, and so is Shemitah. Ma'ishno Shabbos, or Ma'ishno Shvius. Why do we differentiate between Shabbos and Shemitah? That's the punchline. That's the key. It must be that there was a special factor applicable to Shvius that sets it apart from everything else. That explains the whole discrepancy. Why Rabbi Meir treats Shemitah differently, and likewise Rabbi Yehuda. Elahasam, rather, over there, by Shemitah Kedaktani Tam, there's a reason. Amar Meir gave the reason. Mipnei mani omer b'Shabbos. Why is it that when it comes to Shabbos, I limit the knas b'shoigig? If you did it by mistake, yikayim, you can keep the plant. B'mezid ya'akar, only b'mezid I uproot it. When it comes to Shemitah, all across the board, the b'shvius, b'shoigig, b'mezid ya'akar. You know why? Because planting on Shemitah can be very detrimental and carries a greater risk of breaching the halachis and bringing about a zilzal and a stumbling block. Because when Yisrael plant new trees, they have to keep a record. A farmer has to keep a ledger. Look, I planted this tree on the second year of the Shemitah cycle, and this way he knows when the tree emerges from the 3 years of Erla, etc. Everything has to be calculated and precise. So if you planted this tree on Shemitah, it's going to go on the public record. Yeah, this thing was planted on Shemitah. Everybody's going to refer back to the records and know exactly when it was planted, and this can bring about a zilzal. a mixture. People are going to think that you can plant on Shemitah. So therefore, Meir says I'm very strict when it comes to planting on Shemitah. I don't want to create this long-lasting, permanent impression that planting on Shemitah is okay. This tree is testament to a Shemitah planting. When it comes to planting on Shabbos, as terrible as it is, but it's not a permanent testament to that, because nobody's counting. Nobody's keeping records in terms of what day of the week it was planted. So even though you planted on Shabbos, it's long forgotten. And therefore, I don't come down so hard when it comes to planting on Shabbos. Another reason would be, Nechshadu Yisrael al Shvius. Klal Yisrael at that time were apparently more negligent when it came to planting on Shemitah. So that needs more reinforcement and more knas. Well, Nechshadu al Shabbos as opposed to Shabbos, which are kept in any case. Why do you have to add this new facet? So he meant like this. Just like when it comes to planting on Shemitah, I said it goes on the public record, and it becomes, public testament. Maybe Shabbos as well can have that concern. You know why? Why would a person have to know that he planted it on Shabbos? Listen to this. Zimnan de mikla yom labed b'Shabbos. The halacha is that if a person wants to sort of chaperein, get his first year of Erla behind him, so what he does is he plants 30 days before Rosh Hashanah. 30 days is like a month, it counts as a year. Once we cross Rosh Hashanah, it's considered the year 2 of the Erla. Provided it was exactly 30 days or more to Rosh Hashanah. So let's say day 30 to Rosh Hashanah was on Shabbos, and he planted it on that day. He's going to have to keep track of that. Right? Down the road, they're going to say, 1 second, is this a second year of Erla, a third year of Erla? Oh, it depends. When was it planted? For Rosh Hashanah. How many days before Rosh Hashanah? Was it Friday? Was it Shabbos? Oh, it's Shabbos. Oh, it's 30 days before Rosh Hashanah. So now it goes down public record, public perception, that a Shabbos plant isn't okay. It's okay. Zimna the Mikl Yamam b'Shabbos. It could very well be that the day 30 to Rosh Hashanah was on Shabbos. It's only because he planted on that day who the Sakli Shata. If he plants on that day, he gets the year. He gets the 30-day period, which counts as a year. But otherwise, if he waits till Sunday, he doesn't get the year. And the fact that he counts it as a year indicates to everybody that he planted on Shabbos. That creates a terrible precedent. And a knas should be applied even by Shegig Tashman. The answer to that is the Davar Acher, the additional factor that Rameir mentions. You should know typically people are very careful when it comes to Shabbos. There's no need to make extra precautions and extra penalties. Davar Acher Nechshadu Yisrael al Shvius. Although Yisrael perhaps are not as careful by Shemitah, so extra penalties are in place. Well, the Nechshadu al Shabbos, when it comes to Shabbos, people are extra careful. There's no need to go overboard. So we answered Rameir. Again, Rameir holds Knas applies to Mezid. What about Shaygig? Only by the Rabbanans, which require extra reinforcement, but not by the Iraisis. We have an exception, Shemitah. Because it's an everlasting testament to a Shemitah planting. We don't want that to be. And therefore we apply a Knas. You have to uproot it, even though it was B'Shaygig. Let's go to the other side of the coin. We have a student of Rabbi Yehuda as well. Rabbi Yehuda was going from the other direction. We always apply Knas to Mezid. Regarding Shaygig, only by Dairaisis, which are more strict and more severe. Question is, why by Shemitah did Rabbi Yehuda take the backseat, so to speak? He limited the Knas to Shaygig, to Mezid, not to Shaygig. Did Rabbi Yehuda read like Kasha? That can be answered very simply again, because Shemitah is an exception in the other direction. But Asr Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda is locale, and his community, they had a very serious attitude to Shemitah. Chamir lu Shvius. To them, Shemitah was like end all. So it didn't need that extra reinforcement. In fact, there was a story, Dahuda Amr le Chavere, a fellow who lived in Rabbi Yehuda's area, turned to his friend and cast an insult in his direction. Dayer Badai Rasa, you're a ger, the son of a ger. Amr le, the fellow retorted, well, I might be a ger, but I'm not as bad as you. I keep Shemitah properly, you don't. Apparently that was paramount in their eyes. That was the biggest insult. Or I should say the biggest defense. I don't consume forbidden perish fruit like you do. And that was the end of the argument. So they took Shvius very seriously. And therefore, Rabbi Yehuda holds, we don't have to go overboard when it comes to penalizing the violators. We can limit it to the Mezid. Okay, let's recap today's DAF briefly. We started the sugya of the Metame Medameya Menasech, and we went into the sugya of Hezek Shein Nikr. He damages, he harms, but it's not visible, it's not tangible, it's more in the spiritual realm. What happens there? Either we hold it's Shmei Hezek, Torah, it's considered like a damage, or we say Lo Shmei Hezek. It's only Midrabanan that he has to pay. When does he have to pay? Oh. So we had a Machlekes Rabbi Meir and Rabbanan and Rabbi Yehuda. According to Rabbi Meir, whether it's Shegig or Mezid, we apply the Knas, because it's an Isad Rabbanan, which requires reinforcement, as opposed to Isurim Daraisa, where we limit the Knas to Mezid, except for Avodah Zarah, because of its severity, except for Shemitah, because, as we said before, it goes on the public record and creates a precedent. Rabbi Yehuda takes the opposite approach, and his shita seems to be reflected in our Mishnah, that we limit the Knas only to Mezid, because it's the Rabbanan, whereas by Isurim Daraisa, like Melachas Daraisa, we apply the Knas even to Shegig as well. We have two exceptions, Avodah Zarah, because people are naturally repulsed and distanced from Avodah Zarah, therefore there's no need to stretch the Knas to Shegig, and likewise by Shemitah, because in his locale, Shemitah enjoyed that extra protection, and therefore there's no need to stretch the Gzeira, the Knas, and we limited it only to Mezid. All the best to you, and Hatzlacha Meruba.